February the 3rd, 1637, a tavern in Haarlem, Holland. An auctioneer opens the bidding on a pound of tulip bulbs, the same bulbs men have traded fortunes for all winter. And for the first time in years, silence. Nobody bids, nobody moves. By the end of the week, the most expensive flowers on earth are close to worthless. This is the story of the world's first financial bubble, and why almost everything you've heard about it is wrong. To understand why grown men bet houses on flowers, you have to understand where they lived. The Dutch Republic in the 1630s was, per head, the richest place on the planet. Its East India Company, founded in 1602, was the world's first publicly traded corporation, and Amsterdam had built the world's first modern stock exchange to trade its shares. Money was new, liquid, and restless. A merchant class with cash to burn was looking for ways to show it. Enter the tulip. It arrived from the Ottoman Empire in the late 1500s, and by the 1590s, the botanist Carolus Clusius was cultivating it at Leiden, where, as the story goes, some of the first bulbs in Holland were promptly stolen from his garden. The tulip had one property no other status symbol could match. Some bulbs broke, erupting into flames of color, white streaked with crimson, petals like fire. No grower could produce this on demand. No one knew why it happened. We now know the cause was a virus, one that weakened the very bulbs it made beautiful. Scarcity wasn't manufactured, it was biological. The most legendary of all was the Semper Augustus, blood-red flames on white. By the 1620s, only a handful were said to exist, and their owner refused to sell. Through the 1620s, tulips were a rich man's obsession. By 1634, they were becoming everyone's. Weavers, carpenters, bakers, ordinary tradesmen began buying in, and the trade moved from gardens into the back rooms of taverns, in informal clubs the Dutch called colleges. Here's the mechanism that turned a flower market into a financial one. A tulip bulb spends most of the year underground. You can't inspect it, you can't take delivery. So traders sold promises, contracts for bulbs still in the earth to be delivered come summer, and those promises could be resold. And resold again. The Dutch had a name for it, wind handle, the wind trade, buying and selling air. At the peak, a single contract could reportedly change hands several times in a day, each buyer certain a greater fool waited behind him. Almost nobody in the chain ever intended to plant anything. The prices became scripture. One pamphlet from 1637 claimed a single viceroy bulb traded for a basket of goods worth over 2,500 guilders, wheat, rye, 4 oxen, 8 pigs, 12 sheep, wine, beer, butter, cheese, a bed, a suit of clothes, and a silver cup. The Semper Augustus was said to be valued at 10,000 guilders, by most accounts more than the price of a fine house on an Amsterdam canal. Treat those numbers the way historians do, as claims, mostly from pamphlets written to mock the trade, but the direction of travel is not in doubt. In the final months, November 1636 into February 1637, prices for even common bulbs reportedly multiplied 20-fold. Some historians point out that plague was moving through Dutch towns in those same months, and argue it bred a strange recklessness. If tomorrow wasn't promised, why not gamble today? By February 1637, the trade had detached completely from the flower. It was paper promising paper, priced on the belief that someone else would always pay more. Which brings us back to Haarlem. February the 3rd, 1637, an auction opens and finds no buyers. Not lower buyers, no buyers. Belief is the entire load-bearing structure of a bubble, and word of a failed auction traveled canal fast. Within days, panic had spread across the trading towns. Prices in the tavern colleges didn't decline. They simply stopped existing because a price requires someone willing to pay it. Now came the reckoning. Thousands of contracts promised buyers would pay peak prices, come summer, for bulbs suddenly worth a fraction of that on paper. Growers demanded payment, buyers refused. And when the disputes reached the courts essentially shrugged. Many judges treated tulip contracts as gambling debts, unenforceable. The authorities in Holland suspended the contracts rather than force settlement, and in Haarlem the disputes dragged on until buyers were eventually allowed to walk away for a few % of the agreed price. And that spring, across Holland, the tulips came up anyway. and bloomed, indifferent to what anyone had paid for them. Here is the twist. The story you've probably heard, a nation ruined, fortunes annihilated, bodies in the canals, is mostly myth. When historians finally went into the Dutch archives, they found something quieter. The trade involved a relatively small network of merchants and craftsmen, not the whole nation. Because the courts wouldn't enforce the contracts, most of the catastrophic debts were simply never paid. Documented bankruptcies traceable to tulips were few. The Dutch economy, the strongest in the world, sailed on, largely untouched. So where did the apocalypse come from? From moralists. Contemporary pamphleteers wrote the crash as divine punishment for greed, and 2 centuries later, a Scottish journalist named Charles Mackay repackaged their satire as history in his 1841 book on popular delusions. The version the world still quotes, but if the damage was exaggerated, the pattern was real, and it was brand new. A novel asset, a story about why this time is different. Prices climbing on borrowed belief rather than use. Paper sold to people who never wanted the thing itself. And then the one quiet moment when belief blinks. A room in Haarlem, a hand raised for bids, and silence. Every collapse in this series is a variation on that room. The tulip was just the first domino. 80 years later, the bubble came back. Twice, in the same year. In Paris, a convicted killer on the run talked an entire kingdom into replacing gold with paper. In London, a company with barely any trade sold the public shares in everything, and Isaac Newton himself got burned. 1720, the year the governments ran the con. That's next time, on the Full Ledger.